Thank you very much. My name is Mareike Schmeres. I'm a research fellow here at ODI. I'm always intrigued by the suggestion of the toolbox. And I was wondering whether maybe Mr. Brahimi particularly could talk us through whether you think that is a useful image, because a toolbox
It's
always...
his image. I saw it from him.
but a toolbox always implies that you have a very clear kind of problem and you can pull out certain tools and somehow there's some engineering behind it. And I just wonder whether really that helps us to understand the other point that you make, which is analysis can be wrong and then it leads to wrong policies. If we think of all of this as grand engineering problems, does that really help us in trying to find the solution? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take one more. Gentleman behind you.
Richard Cotton, and I work for the Iraq-Britain Business Council. It's promoting international business in Iraq. The issue we come across all the time is corruption in high places. It just seems to be stopping so many efforts to get private enterprise going, and I just wonder whether that isn't something that we should be targeting.
Okay. I think I'll take one more. I'm liking these questions. Yes, this gentleman.
Kofi Annan's starting point. Sorry, Jack McConnell, House of Lords. Kofi Annan's starting point was to make reference to the wider region, not just the immediate region, and to say this is really a crisis that's affecting from one end of North Africa right through to Pakistan and Afghanistan. And I just wondered if any of the contributors wanted to say anything about that wider context. My hand was up as a pessimist when I'm normally an optimist, and it's more because of the wider scenario, even if this immediate crisis can be better managed in the short term. I worry that the factors elsewhere, Israel, Palestine, North Africa, Afghanistan, Pakistan, makes the whole situation
Brussels,
more
Paris,
pessimistic.
London.
Yeah.
It's, yes. Lakhdar, the Lakhdar Brahimi Toolbox.
First, Kofi Annan's first point was Norman Freeman, not having said that, yes, the international community has a toolbox. They have a lot of experience. They have faced, problems that are similar. No two situations are alike, but going from one crisis to the other, you do have experience, and you do have that notional box or boxes that you can use. But the tool, the main tool really for situations like this is the Security Council. The Security Council, if it really speaks in one voice and supports, people, Kofi remembers that in Afghanistan when he asked me to go to, I came back to him in 2 years later, and I said, it's enough. We have done everything we can as Secretary General and his envoy. But the Security Council is not interested in Afghanistan. So, we cannot go anymore. We'll go back to the Security Council and tell them, if you really think that there is something for us to do, we need your support. And here, you see, they have been divided. They have been the victims of this very, very wrong analysis, some of them, not Russia, by the way. I think the analysis of Russia was right from the beginning. And they have built these wrong policies. And they have taken those policies to the Security Council. And they have built alliances. You remember the London 11. I told all of them that, you are not united yourself. And you are trying to unite the Syrians and so on. Anyway, so the Security Council is really the main place where things start and things end.
But just on picking up on that, when we were talking before this, if I may, that we're talking about the Security Council. But for example, you take the attack on a hospital in Aleppo, and the question was, who did it? So everyone said, well, who has planes? It has to either be the Syrians or the Russians. So the Syrians say, we didn't do it. And the Russians say, we didn't do it. And they usually throw in an allegation that it must have been the Americans who did it. Well, we have the technology now to say who did it. Does there have to be some research, information gathering? Does the Carter Center have to, get all the GPS out, the satellite imagery out? If you go to the Security Council, as you said this, Kofi Annan, everyone will say, I didn't do it, I did, and it will be gridlocked. Is there a way to help the Security Council do their business so that, pointing a finger of blame?
First of all, it doesn't need a plane to hit a hospital. Maybe it has been done with a missile or something. But you are absolutely right. But it is the Security Council that can do that. It is the Security Council that can order an investigation and demand that we absolutely need to know what has happened in this incident. Perhaps we are being a little bit unrealistic in expecting the 15 members and especially the 5 permanent members to speak in one voice day and night and every day and so on. But I think, I'll go back to Russia and the United States. They themselves speak of P2 and P3 now. There are 3 countries on the one hand, the Westerners, and Russia and China on the other. I think if they really, as I told you, if you are worried about President Assad and his position and so on, what if the Iranians and the Russians go and it's enough? We are not going to support your war anymore. What will he do? How about all on the other side, the many armed groups that are there? Again, if Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the Americans, the British, the French say, finished, we are not going to finance you, what will happen? All these people will tell you, okay, what's the alternative? Let's find a solution. So, the tool in the toolbox in this situation is really the Security Council, and on their behalf, Russia and the United States.
It's a question about the wider region. Helen, do you want to pick up on that? Because, the threat of the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, Pakistan has been dealing with Al-Qaeda, Taliban, various groups for so long.
I think Pakistan has spent more time creating them than dealing with them. But just to pick up for a minute on what Lakhdar just said, no, that's true.
No, I know it's true.
It
would be funny if it wasn't tragic. But, yes.
I don't think it's a secret anymore.
Yes,
But when we speak about the Security Council, you said what can be done to help them. They are the ones who have to help themselves. They have enough authority. Look, if what we are saying should be and is not at the moment, how it is different from what we want it to be. If what we want it to be was unrealistic, then their mandate is unrealistic. How can that be possible? How can we say that so many years ago when the Charter of the United Nations was constructed and the Security Council came up as an institution, as a central point of that charter, and a mandate was given, they were stupid at that time to give that mandate. Yes, they may not succeed always. The point is they have to act. And when they act, things start happening. Look at Darfur. In Darfur, because it was a Security Council mandate, there was much more that happened than would usually have happened in such situations. The case was sent to the ICC by the Security Council using their trigger mechanism in the International Criminal Court statute. So a lot of things can be done. The point is, when the Security Council makes up its mind that things have to be done, others rally around it, and then things get to be done.
And who talks about Darfur now, and who pays attention? The problem is that the world is exhausted. There's so many protracted crises.
That's another question.
Yeah.
And you were talking about this widening of crisis. There is of course a common trend there, the thread of Islamic extremism, which, I come from a country where I've seen religion being used to grab power and to obstruct progress, social or otherwise. I think now that has become a global phenomenon. It stepped out of the Afghan situation in the 80s and everybody, it is like a domino effect. And I think human nature is such that you take bad examples and really feel that these can be used for mischief everywhere. So this is, I think, something that we all share. This is something we all have to confront. But we have to confront it with some kind of commitment. Ifs and buts in this question will not help us.
Can I come in?
I also want you to come in on the corruption, because
exactly.
because it does actually it brings us to discuss another part, which we haven't discussed, is that, the responsibility of leaders in the region. I mean, look at Iraq, for example, that you spent a lot of time looking at. Nabadi coming out and talking about corruption. He's been overwhelmed now. I mean, that particular question, this gentleman who would be out in Iraq investing if it wasn't for the...
And maybe he is anyway, but there's business to be done. But I want to connect that question with the question about the larger region, because they are linked. And I first want to explain my pessimism vote, because that's linked to that as well. Because if you ask me, do you think that with Syria, Yemen, at least there's Libya, there are processes, does it give hope? Have we turned a page? I might vote yes, I agree with that. But if you say, what's the state of the region overall? Do you think it is improving, or is it going to get worse before it gets better? Then I think I vote that way, because the problem is that, yes, we may have turned a corner in the states that have had the worst of it, where civil war has broken out as a result of the failure of the Arab Spring, or whatever you want to call it. But there are a number of states that are terribly fragile, and it is because of a crisis of governance. And the Islamic State is just a symptom of that.
Exactly.
And the corruption is a symptom of that. And that crisis is extending all the way throughout the region, and I'm not sure where you start and where you end, because it gets very blurred. But the thing is that the crisis of governance is so deep that states that are still standing, such as Egypt, maybe Jordan, maybe Tunisia for sure, even though it's seen as a shining example, are terribly fragile. Saudi Arabia, terribly fragile, and could collapse tomorrow or next year or 5 years from now. And it will compound the humanitarian crisis of refugees by magnitudes I don't want to mention. And it will lead to a change there as well. Maybe they have to go through it, because it is very hard to reform these very sclerotic governance systems. They have outlived their shelf life, essentially. But it makes me pessimistic, because I think they have to go through it and create new orders, which I think will have to be, simply because the model has failed, will have to be more decentralized systems. But how exactly it will shape up, I don't know.
Yes, please.
The violations of IHL and attacks on medical facilities, and the potential role of the Security Council. Because while it is true that in Syria we may or may not know who has hit a hospital, there are many other instances where we know very clearly who has been responsible. Kunduz in Afghanistan, or Yemen. So I think we also need to be honest in recognizing that until we really reform the way in which the Security Council operates, we can't expect, the Security Council to intervene in certain crises and not in others. This is what, at the moment, angers every humanitarian. While there are clear responsibilities, nobody is being held responsible for them. And so, some countries, ahead of the World Humanitarian Summit, but also in negotiations, are trying to advance the notion that perhaps there should be a suspension of the veto in case of mass atrocities or, other violation of IHL. And that's something that needs to be seriously entertained, because otherwise, the potential of the Security Council to really be used remains non-existent.
I'm going to take the privilege of the chair to ask a question that was put in my mind, let's say in the last week, and I want one of the other elders, elder wise men who are with us, to respond. Is that, I won't say who, because I'm a journalist who keeps her word, but I spoke to a leader of a European country in the last week. And I talked about Syria, and this person said, well, once we get a new American administration, we will have a new president who will become more engaged, who will lead an effort. President Carter's already shown me his answer. That we think that will either be, we don't want to get into whether it's going to be Trump or Clinton, but that there will be a new president. And once there's a new American president, that person will become more engaged, and that will help spearhead a new international engagement in the Middle East. President Carter, did you want to respond to that? Do you think, we're talking about how should the world respond? There's been a lot of discussion about how Barack Obama has not wanted to get more involved. Russia has become more involved in such a way that even some of the Arab states are saying we wish that Russia was our ally and not the United States. Looking ahead, do you think there will be a change?
Well, I think I agree with Lecter that Russia has been right about Syria from the very beginning. The United States has been wrong until the last few months. They've changed. And now that Russia and the United States are cooperating, I think the whole world ought to give them credit and support their common effort. It's very fragile. And a lot of people still condemn Russia over and over for Ukraine and so forth, and so do I. But I think that Putin has reached out to the Western world and said, why don't we take the leadership? The elders were with Putin about a year ago. And Putin said then that the only way to get started on Syria was to get the United States and Russia to cooperate and invite in Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Iran. Since then, they've expanded that group. But I think we ought to give them full credit for it. And I would say that other members of the Security Council ought to try to solidify what the United States and Russia are trying to do. One thing is to prepare a transition plan for Bashar al-Assad, say for 18 months, to lead him from his present dictatorial constitution to a constitution that would be minimizing his influence, but not to condemn him or send him to prison, which he would not accept. So the plan for what we need to do is there, even during the transition period. And the Russians and the Iranians say from one point of view to another that they are in favor of seeing Bashar eventually be forced to step down. But I don't think that they're ready to say that publicly. But I think to go to the United Nations Security Council and get them to agree on this, that there will be a transition period and that we need to lay out a new constitution for Syria that would permit honest elections. The Carter Center will be glad to monitor the election, by the way. But these are the kind of things that are potential solutions to the problem, and the only ones I know. So we're working, the Carter Center is working very closely with Russia and with the United States, and we're trying to put together the amendments that need to be made to the existing Syrian constitution to permit that transition to take place. But that's almost an unavoidable process to bring peace to Syria, in my opinion.
Does anyone else want to? And would a greater American engagement help that if there was a compass coming from Washington? Would it help?
Well, nobody knows how the election's going to
Yeah, okay. Okay.
But I think that
Because there are some who argue that the Saudis will say, well, actually, because the Obama doctrine was of playing less of a role, now there's a Salman doctrine that the region is taking the greater role, and we've seen that in Yemen and Syria with different consequences, of course. But
well, when Saudi Arabia decided to attack Yemen, I happened to be in Saudi Arabia to see King Salman then, and of course the United States went along with and supported Saudi Arabia. I think that's one factor that ought to be cleared up. And that's kind of a remote conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia that should be cleared up. But that could be done as well. But I think Saudi Arabia should have been condemned because they attacked Yemen. But those kind of direct violations of a peaceful, relatively peaceful environment should be addressed. But I don't know what's going to happen with the American election. I'm not going to try to predict about it.
no one
I'm a
does.
Democrat, by the way.
Okay. Capital D and small d. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
But anyway, I'm not sure that no matter which one of the candidates is elected, there's going to be a deeper commitment to cooperating with Russia and working for peace than Obama has been trying to do in the
No,
last
he has.
few months.
John Kerry has, to credit to him, he's
John
really-
Kerry is superb
yes,
in
trying
every
to work with
possible way.
taking every opportunity.
And
yeah.
I think Lavrov and John Kerry have done a superb job,
Yeah.
even when they don't get adequate support from higher levels.
Okay. I think Kofi Annan, did you want to say something?
No, I just wanted to say that if they expect the next U.S. president or administration to get involved actively with troops on the ground and more action. I don't see it happening. I don't think the American people want it, and none, whether it's Hillary or Trump, I don't see either one going that route. So we need really to work hard. And as President Carter has said, we are lucky to have John Kerry and Sergei Lavrov working that well together, and we should really encourage them to do as much as they
The
can.
time remaining,
The
yeah.
time remaining, because even when a new president comes in, it's going to take a while to get their policy going, to go through all this. And Syria may not be the highest item on the agenda.
Indeed, indeed. Let's take another round of questions. Yes? Oh, okay.
Oliver Davis, International Crisis Group.
Oh.
We've set this up. So I wanted to broaden the scope of analysis a little bit beyond the Syria issue that we're facing right now, and look less at solving the internal problems and more at the global policy response, because it seems like the Arab Spring, if for want of a better term, was a crisis of transition and political succession. So what can the world do, the international community do, to better identify these issues and better handle them, rather than going along with sort of an assisted revolution in the countries, throwing our weight behind one player or the other? And particularly when these crises have begun, do you think that we need to address our model of stabilization, which seems to be defining how we approach crises? And I suppose there's two ways to go. Either it's the right approach and it needs to be done better, it's the first step, or in fact it's flawed. And what we need to do now is focus less on going for internal stabilization and more an immediate response externally between the different actors. So I wonder if you see that something that can be addressed.
Yes.
Thank you. Hilary Benn, Shadow Foreign Secretary. I wanted to come to the question of the Security Council. I very much agree with what you said about the French proposal on the use of the veto in certain circumstances, but it seems to me that the first question is there the will to do anything? And sometimes the threat of the veto gets in the way. And the second problem is, who's going to do the work if the will is found? And the question I wanted to ask was about the possibility of building up regional capacity to act. Because I think part of the fear in the Security Council is they agree something should be done, and then they look at each other and say, okay, well, who's going to do what? And I think the African Union is an interesting example, because you look at what they did. I mean, Burundi was their first joint operation, then Darfur, what they're seeking to do in Somalia. And of course, the countries in the region where there is conflict have the greatest incentive. The problem in the case of Syria, of course, is the countries in the region are funding and fueling the conflict on either side. And I'd be really interested in comments about whether building that capacity is one of the ways we might be able to unlock a will to act on the part of the Security Council.
Okay, and this gentleman. Thank you.
Mehdi Al-Khatib. I'm currently interning at Chatham House. My question is more directed at Lakhdar Brahimi and possibly the elders. I was wondering, considering the regionalization of the Syria conflict itself and many other conflicts such as Yemen and so on, I was wondering whether you think an Iran-Saudi rapprochement would be the best solution towards stabilizing many of the conflicts in the region, and if so, how exactly would you enact it, and what would this rapprochement look like?
Is that for your Chatham House paper? Key to it. It's absolutely key.
Military intervention by anybody is not good. And our recent experience, I think, demonstrate that. Russian intervention in Afghanistan was catastrophic. American intervention in Afghanistan was, not successful, to say the least. American intervention in Iraq was horrible. And Western intervention in Libya was catastrophic. So I think military intervention should be, the last option, and only if duly authorized by the Security Council. Sarkozy and Bernard-Henri Lévy leading everybody into Libya the way they did was not beneficial for anybody. So I would not accept that. So what we want from the Security Council is to show political will and willingness to work together, and perhaps ultimately think of military intervention on behalf, duly mandated by the Security Council, and really as a last resort. I think Syria, regional, the African Union. The African Union, I think we should give credit to the Africans. They have an organization and they want to make it work. They try, they don't always succeed. Their attempts are not always, done the right way, but they are really trying. They are really, really trying. The Arab League is not there yet. So, what kind of regional capacity you can build in? We are very, very far from that situation. I think the Arab League needs to really start to exist, and then they would do. Even though I think Kofi will agree with me that their first intervention in Syria was rather effective. That military group that they sent there came back with a good report, and I think they were, if they followed their first instinct, but they changed course, and they immediately said no, go away, and they went to Kofi Annan. Where the local capacity is not there. I think we do need the Security Council more than. The other thing is, to be uncharitable, it is understandable that you make a mistake in your analysis. After all, the president of Tunisia fell in 3 or 4 weeks. The president of Egypt, big Egypt, fell in less than a month. It is understandable that you expect the president of Syria also to fall fast. That's okay. But it takes you 5 years to realize that that's not happening. That is a little bit, difficult to understand or accept. But now we are there. But you see, this is the regional problems that we have. Everybody, I think Kofi was the first one, or I don't know, or I did, will say there is no military solution to the problem. Slowly, everybody repeated with us that, but nobody believes in it. Nobody believed in it. Until quite recently, where the Americans and the Russians are now saying, with confidence, there is no military solution. We want to.
But from there, just a quick thing, so we get through the Iran-Saudi one, because just to make a point, there are signs that Iran doesn't agree with Russia. That you have Ali Akbar Velayati saying again there is a red line that we want Assad to stay. That Iran is divided on, whereas Russia is willing to say, well, we can find someone else besides President Assad to guarantee our interests, and besides we have military bases there now, we're okay on the ground. Whereas Iran isn't, Iran is not so confident about losing President Assad, which is to our third question about Iran and Saudi.
The short answer is that you are absolutely right. If the Iranians and the Saudis could get together, quite a few of our problems will be solved almost instantly. That is not going to happen tonight. But I think, again, the international community and even a group like ours should not accept that this is not possible. Iran and Saudi Arabia are going to be neighbors for a very long time. And they have got to find ways of coexisting. There are problems that have existed for a long time already under the Shah. This is not new, but they were trying to manage them, and they were helped in trying to manage them. Something has gone wrong last few years, and there again, if you want, this Shia Sunni thing, I think the origin. The original sin is really the Iraq-Iran war. Khomeini came back from France wanting to be the leader of the Muslims. Because of the war, he decided to become the leader of the Shia against the Sunnis. So we have got to work our way back and out of that heritage. Again, I don't think that Muslims can accept that we are going to have a 100-year war between Shia and Sunni, something that we didn't even have at the very beginning when the problem started. So, you are right. Iran and Saudi Arabia could have the key, at least for the beginning of the solution of our problems. They do not look like walking that way immediately, but I'm sure that they will have to one day.
Claire, did you want to say something? Because there was a question about stabilization. There's been a lot of research and regret about the stabilization in Iraq and Afghanistan, the two big wars of the last decade. I'm sure at the ODI you've been looking at the international engagement of how you do it better when you try to put the country back together again. Just a short answer, if you'd like a reflection on
Yes,
that.
I don't think we can really point out to any stabilization strategy that has really worked, and part of it is the way stabilization has been conceptualized. I mean, there are so many objectives in a stabilization strategy, often at odds with one another. It's counterinsurgency, it's counterterrorism, it's peace building, it's development, it's humanitarian. It's all conflated together. There isn't a very clear aim, and the objectives often, because they're in contradiction, don't allow really, the strategy to be rolled out properly. But the biggest problem has been that it's also been used almost as a one-size-fits-all in most contexts. And these transitions are really messy processes. They are deeply contextual. And if you don't put the analysis of who are the players on the ground, how they operate, the alliances, the networks, how a society evolves, there is no process of stabilization. But
elections will.
Well, elections have been used as a panacea everywhere. I think, they often worsen the situation on the ground rather than improve it, unfortunately. And again, it's something that is in our paradigm, as Western actors that are familiar with, a certain concept of democracy and, transitional process, but it's not necessarily what people in this country, that are affected by crisis see as the way out of a particular situation. And
we're coming to the end. I just want to give the chance to if any of the other distinguished wise men and women from the elders wanted to have a quick word into our thing. I know Matti Ahtisaari always says this is a solution for every problem. He doesn't believe that there's no problem without a solution. But would either Mary or Gro or Mart, would you like to say something before we draw to a close, or are you happy to defer to your colleagues in the, yeah?
I have to take up your challenge. When I and my wife and our son moved from Tanzania, Dar es Salaam, to New York in the beginning of '77, for me to take up the Namibia issue, which took time up to 1990 before they got their independence. I came to a United States which was example of having egalitarian policies. So in the poor families, the young boys and girls knew that they could get a better education than their parents had got. They even had 77 in the United States capacity for bipartisan foreign policy between Republicans and Democrats. Now, more than a year ago, economists wrote an article and there was a subtitle, it looked around the world, because they didn't feel anymore that the United States was an example that could be utilized for market economy anywhere else in the world. And there was a nice subtitle, if you want to experience the American dream, go to Sweden. Now, I come from a neighboring country, and they could have mentioned any of the Nordic countries. But I'm coming to the point that if we want to avoid conflicts in the world, then we have to push for egalitarian policies all over the world. And I think it's totally wrong to talk about Western values, because this young man who killed himself in Tunis, he talked about global values, and they are global. When any country joins the UN, they accept, while doing that, many values, and we have not held them actually accountable of doing what they promised when they joined the United Nations as a member state. And therefore, my point is that I hope we in Europe at least learned now from the refugee crisis that we have to try to solve those conflicts when they come, because it saves so many lives. We have seen now 500,000 people killed in Syria. We could have solved them in 2012 already, what is happening now. So we have to speak very candidly on what the responsibilities of all the member states are and how they have to treat much more fairly and justly their citizens, give decent education to boys and girls, avoid that there are not so many young people who don't have any hope for decent future. So there's a lot of work that we can do. Let's join the forces.
Thank you, Marty. I think you're absolutely right that the refugee crisis has concentrated the minds of European, of Western leaders on the need to resolve the crises of the Middle East, because if we don't want to go to the Middle East is coming to us. And I think if there was a way to summarize our discussion today, I think to take a phrase which was already used by someone else, "Yes, we can," is the motto here, or the rallying cry from all of the distinguished guests that we've heard from today, and even from some of your questions. But I suppose the big issue is, will the world use its power and its institutions? And maybe that's a question the ODI will be looking at. So I think it's time to hand over to Marty for the last comments.
Thank you. Thank you, Lise. Lise, that was great. You are an absolutely amazing, outstanding moderator.
No, I'm
so thank you very much. I'm not looking forward to the next time I'm asked to chair any discussion. So my name is Marta. I work here at ODI on issues of governance, security, and in the last year in particular, migration. I take away two things from tonight's debate, and they are slightly contrasting. I share Lisa's sort of optimism and the yes, we can spirit, and I did put my hand up in favor of we've seen the worst of it. And that's because if Lakhdar Brahimi tells me that Lavrov and Kerry know what needs to be done, I feel reassured. It seems to me that knowing that the analysis was wrong and that led to wrong policies, but we now know which analysis was right, is a good place to be, as is a good place to be where we're all agreeing that military intervention is not on the cards and we enter a period of tough but at least political negotiations. So that's for the vote for the optimism. I'm much more worried about what I heard about solidarity and humanity tonight. And what strikes me is that all of us in Europe and the European states and the European unions are not the first in line to help provide solution for this crisis. And it was interesting that as we recognize that Europe faced a crisis of solidarity, actually that's leaving us at the periphery of the political landscape too. So not being able to deal with a crisis is actually leaving us pretty powerless. And you know, we've heard a lot about the US and Russia and the regions tonight, but not much about, you know, the European states and the European powers. So I wonder whether it's time to look elsewhere for solutions. But I'm also reassured by the resilience of Syrian people and other people, I'm sure, in the region, as of the idea that there is a lot more that can be done with regional actors in the way that we have learned from Africa and elsewhere. So mixed feelings, but a strain of, given the topic of the conversation, it's not bad to leave the room with a sense of hope. So first of all, just to finish this absolutely unique night we had with all of you tonight, let me, on behalf of ODI, thank Lise, of course, and our esteemed panelists, so Lakhdar Brahimi, Hina Ilyani, Sara Pantuliano, and Joost Hilsterman, for their, I would say, very honest and insightful contributions. It's been a real inspiration to listen to your experiences and your wisdom. I would also like to thank our guests, our audiences here in the room, but also all over the world, online, the elders, their advisory council, and all of you who joined us this evening. A very big thank you to the team at the Elders and ODI, expertly led by my colleague Rebecca, who's done an absolutely amazing job in the last few weeks to put all of this together. I'm about to invite you all to have a glass of wine, but to get there, you need to wait for another couple of minutes. Well, I invite our distinguished guests, the Elders and their advisory council, to leave the room through the door on the right, while everyone else please remain seated, where there is a bus that waits for them for their next engagement.
Thank you very much. Andrew.